Let's make up the bottle bag, the carry bag. This is quite a fun little project. I've just put a little loop and D-ring on that side seam just so as that you can hook on a wrist strap or a hook your bottle carrier onto a bag or something like that. Might be handy. You can hook your keys to it. So opening those buttonholes up so as your drawstring can go through there, make sure your drawstring is the right size. Just we use some black fabric, same as the base, with a contrast red stitching. As you can see, I have left my stabilizer on behind those buttonholes. I actually did end up taking that off. And you can see I've taken the buttonholes out on the other side. So we have one set of buttonholes. We want to do that seam up with a 1/2 inch seam and the lining the same. Sewing up with a 1/2 inch seam all the way along one of the long edges. So let's sew that together. Make sure we match our points, especially that top section. And when you're going to iron that seam open. But I want to just open up that loop that holding the D-ring and then just top stitch either side of the loop so as that the loop fabric is attached to the seam allowance. I'm top stitching both sides. It just gives it a bit more strength because I'm just very aware that it is holding a bottle. You don't want that going awry or ripping out. Just gives a bit more security, okay? So we just basically stitch both sides of that through all layers. Once we have that seam opened up and pressed, and the same with our lining, let's stitch that together along the top edge where those buttonholes are. We're going to stitch this line to make sure that seam on seam intersection is matched. And then once we've done that, we're going to stitch just to the side of the perimeter stitching line at the top there. So it will be a hare's whisker bigger than a 1/2 inch seam, a standard stitch. And then once we've done that, we're going to see the foot magically change to an edge stitching foot or a patchwork sole. We're going to edge stitch along that with all the seam allowances pointing towards the lining. That will keep the lining down inside the project so as it can't be seen from the outside once it's pressed. We're going to be stitching on that bottom of that green strip of fabric, and that's going to create our casing for our drawstring. Once that seam has been pressed slightly, let's join our long seams all the way from our lining through to our panels. We need to leave a 5 inch gap in our lining along the seam. You can see those blue marks. Mark that indicator, keep those seams in the same direction and sew that seam up. Once we've done that, the bottom round seam or the open seam of this tube needs to have a stay stitch of about 1/2 inch in from the raw edge, a stay stitch. This will help us actually put our circular bases on. Find our quarter mark, so it's fold in half, seam on seam. There's our quarter marks, and that will match the quarter marks of our disc or our circular bottom. I'm just marking those with a pen so you can see them in the video. And there we've got our quarter marks marked on our circular base pattern. Just so as you can see where they are when we're sewing. So a seam, start with a side seam onto a notch. Doesn't matter which notch it is, it does not matter at all. Put a pin or a quilt clip in. Now let's find our notch for our next quarter. Okay, that looks tight, but it's actually not, because once that is clipped, we're going to clip it every 3/8 of an inch, every centimetre, every 3/8. Not quite to the stitching, but almost. Every 3/8, a little bit less than 1/2 an inch. When that's spread out, look how that fits. It fits perfectly. And yet, before that seam is clipped, you think it won't fit. So it's been made to fit directly. Right. So you can do section at a time, or you can do the whole thing. It's up to you. I'm just going to be sewing on my stay stitching. So it's very important that we've got our quarter marks and clips on top of each other. I'm going to clip my next section. And there's that section there. And it is all going to fit. I'm really very happy with how this does sit together. We have the circle or the base circular piece on the bottom of the work with our tube of our bottle holder on the top. So against the foot rather than being on the feed dog. And it all fits together. Right. It might be a bit wiggly, but that's fine. We're going to do the same principle for the actual other panel as well, at the other end of the tube, which will then be turned out and made into the carrier. So we've got the black embroidered red worked base, and then we've got the quarter marks. I've clipped every 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to be sewing this into place as well. Because we've got bag stabilizer in both objects, top and bottom, it's going to be a little bit resistant to the curve, but just push it into the foot. Just push the work slightly into the foot as you're going, and you'll find that it stitches perfectly. So we keep the cut edge or the snipped edge needs to be sitting on the outside edge of the curve of the black for every section. If you just sew in a section at a time, it will all fit perfectly together. Once you've done this, you can actually stitch it around again if you wish, if you think it's a bit wiggly. Up to you. Then we're going to turn this through the gap we've left in one of the seams in the lining. It's a little bit of a wrestle, but it's not too hard. If I'd thought about it, I should have turned it through on the end of the sleeve board. There we have a tube. Lining one side and panels the other. You'll have a few little threads hanging out in places. Just give them a trim off. So we've closed that seam we turned through and turned it inside out. And now we're going to stitch in the ditch on the bottom of the green seam here. And that's going to create our casing for our drawstring. We're going to stitch in the ditch along the seam. You can stitch along the top edge as well, just edge stitch along the top if you wish. Up to you, it's a personal choice, don't have to. I think I did. I thought that it made the fabric sit a little bit better by stitching along the top edge. I can't remember. We'll see in a minute. A quick fun little project. If you didn't want to use the embroidery on it, you could use printed fabrics. I mean, it says it's up to you. But it's a great little bottle carrier in 3 sizes.